People say there is a first time for everything. A first kiss, your first car, the unrequited first love. However, what does this mean in the grand scope of things? Are firsts more monumental because they are the first, or do we get better with practice? Do we remember our firsts as more important than they actually were, holding on to that magical moment as a mark of our past and future selves? Do our firsts outshine what comes next? On A First Time for Everything, we will explore with our guests their firsts and how those impacted the seconds, thirds, and even countless times after. Is the first the best or merely the beginning? Or worse, was the first the last because it was so bad? We will dig into the recesses of our memories and consider whether or not a first was the start of something amazing or something we'd rather not remember. Come along with me, Juliet Rose, as I put our guests in the hot seat to analyze their firsts and how they defined who they became. I promise you're in for a fun, although maybe bumpy ride. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of First Time for Everything. I'm your host, Juliet Rose, and this is the Go Indie Now Network. And we welcome everybody to the show and appreciate you tuning in. And remember to send a star to let us know how we're doing here at Go Indie Now. And each time you contribute, you'll get entered into our season prize package drawing with gift cards, swag, and more. Tonight, we are visited by Marc Watson. And Marc and I have actually never met, so I'm actually just as curious to learn about Marc as probably the rest of you are. So Marc, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I would love to, Juliet, and thank you very much for having me on this evening. So as you said, my name is Marc Watson. I am a genre fiction author from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I have been a quote-unquote professional author only for about 9 years. It's something that I came at a little bit later. I tend to market myself as the anti-author, and I'm happy to get into that a little bit later. But the gist is I tend to do a lot of things in the author circles that kind of fly in the face of standard convention. And outside of that, I love baseball, Mexican food, and any and all kinds of poutine.
Nice. So how many books do you have written?
I have 5 books written. Today is actually the launch day of my 5th book, so I was super excited to be able to sit and talk to you with it on this most momentous of days for me. But I haven't released a book in 5 years, so
Wow.
it's been a little bit of a lull, completely on purpose. It is 5 books and 5 published short stories as well. And 4 of those books are traditionally published, and one of them, my short story collection called Between Conversations, was a self-published book.
Oh, very cool. And real quick, Anita says hi, and Enthralled at Dusk says hey. Welcome, you guys. Really appreciate you guys tuning in. I do think that's a good jumping off point, though. Today is actually your launch. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that book, what it's about, and I guess your motivation for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So as the viewers can see on the image right now, the book immediately to my right here was my debut novel, my very first book, Death Dresses Poorly. And when I wrote this book, and again, I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit later, but when I wrote this book, I was very adamant about the fact that it was going to be a standalone book and there wasn't going to be any more. And I lied. I lied to myself. I lied to everybody who I told that to. I'm on record of saying it a number of times. But artists are kind of flighty sometimes, and sometimes when the muse hits just right. And that's exactly what happened. So today is the launch day of the unexpected sequel to Death Dresses Poorly, which is called Death at a Wedding. And it is not a requirement to read Death Dresses Poorly, but you'll get a much better scope of the characters. I like to think that I kind of kept it as separate as I possibly could while still using some of the characters, but I think you'll appreciate them a lot more if you read this guy right here and then come to the brand new one.
It's funny because my book to my right was also supposed to be a standalone and now is part of a trilogy. So, and I had no intent. I was like, no, I don't write series. I don't write trilogies. And now it is. So yeah, sometimes the characters just have a different idea of what's going to happen.
Exactly.
And mine
right.
also, I always say when people say, was it a series? I'm always like, it's interconnected. You know, like you can read them alone, yes. You can read them together. So yours is like that as well?
Yes, yes, I believe so. I wrote it that way because I did come at it so much later. It has been just about 8 years since Death Dresses Poorly released. So anybody who's coming to Death at a Wedding is completely forgiven for missing the fact that there was a first one, because it did come out so long ago and there's been 3 other books in between the two of them. And I kept saying, nope, this is it. This is the only one. People would ask me, do you have any books that aren't a series? Do you have? I'm like, well, no, these ones are a series, but this one over here, this one stands alone. No, I lied. So people are forgiven for not even knowing anything about it. So I'm glad to talk about it today.
Now, if someone reads this, the one that just came out today,
Mhm.
first, would they get spoilers for Death Dresses Poorly?
There would be one big one, but I don't believe that it's very much of a spoiler. Anybody who has read most books or seen most popular movies can kind of figure out the story arc and where it's going. So although I'm going to try and limit everything I can when it comes to spoiling things, I can say that the major spoiler wouldn't be too much of a surprise to anybody.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thank you for being on the show on such a big day. That's really cool. So let's go back and talk about your first book, Death Dresses Poorly. What is the genre for that? And what is kind of like the premise?
So, Death Dresses Poorly is the story of a young man named Ethan. He's about 20 years old, and he has just broken out of the shadow of his upbringing, where he was raised by his emotionally abusive and drug addicted mother. And on the way back from attending her funeral from an overdose, which is not spoiling anything because it happens right in the first chapter, so I have no problem telling that part. He is actually in a plane crash, and he ends up being the only survivor of the plane crash. And he is confronted by an enigmatic man in black, and the man in black claims to be Death. And Ethan was supposed to die in the plane crash, and Death was supposed to pass on his job of death to Ethan, because in this particular world, death is cyclical, so it passes from one being to another. But of course, Ethan, for the first time in the history of the role of Death, didn't die through sheer willpower and desire to live. And Death now has to try and convince him through other means to take the job through something that Death is not very good at, which would be conversations and interpersonal relationships. I like to say that it's very much me when I was about 20 years old, meeting a version of me and what I predict I will be like when I become like 50 or 60 years old, because the two characters are very similar, and how antagonistic they would be towards one another, because Ethan is very much just broken away and he's trying to create his own place in the world, and now Death has just swept in and wants to take that away from him completely out of necessity, because that's his job. But yeah, it's how antagonistic those two kind of versions of myself would be. And I think anybody would be antagonistic if you had your 20-year-old self meeting a much older version of yourself.
It definitely sounds intriguing. What genre would you say that falls into, or like multiple genres would you say that falls into?
It is multiple genres because it is an urban fantasy. Like it has a lot of urban fantasy elements to it, but it is also a dark comedy. It is very much a comedy. I lean into the comedy as much as possible. I try to tackle dark subjects with comedy whenever possible. So there's laughs in there, I think. It all depends on your penchant for tolerating sarcasm and snark, because there's a lot of that, as I'm sure you can imagine, from a character as kind of emotionally broken as someone like Ethan is. But yeah, urban fantasy dark comedy is the as narrow as I think I can get that down to.
Yeah, that's relatable. My stuff, I was actually just on a Go Indies Now weekend edition yesterday, a couple days ago, and we were talking about multiple genres, and I was saying that, like, for me, it's really hard to nail down genres because I tend to just like bring in so many different aspects. So like, I usually have to ask somebody and be like, what genre do you think this is?
Yeah, it is difficult. I wish we could just like, nope, it's fantasy or it's romance or it's whatever, but very few books are just so perfectly pigeonholed. So right. I lean into that fact. I'm just like, nope, these are the weird kind of things that it is, and take it or leave it.
That's really cool. So kind of going back when you decided to write that story, and this was your first book, correct? Like altogether the first book you published.
Correct? This was the first book I published. There was a roundabout way that we kind of got there, though, because this was not the first book that I wrote. The first book that I wrote is called Catching Hell, and it is available, and it is a epic science fantasy duology. It's very, like, despite the fact that it's also still a fantasy and it is a work of fiction, it's very, very different from Death Dresses Poorly, to the point where I considered using a pen name for this, but I didn't in the end. I like my name, even though it's kind of common, so I wanted to stick with it. So I spent 5 years writing Catching Hell, to the point where it got so long that I had to break it into 2 separate books, which is where they are right now. So I do have Catching Hell Journey and Catching Hell Destination. Those are out there in the world as well. Those are 2 of those 3 books that I mentioned in between. And I needed a way to kind of cleanse my mental palate when I was done living in that world for 5 years, and Death Dresses Poorly is what it was. And my fingers absolutely flew on the keyboard. And as I said, when Catching Hell took just about 5 years, it was a year of writing and about 4 years of editing. Death Dresses Poorly took 6 weeks. And that was for absolutely everything. And I got it together so fast, and I was so happy with where it was. I was in the process of trying to submit to various publishers and agents for Catching Hell, and had various degrees of success. And eventually it was picked up by someone, which was fantastic. Then I was also putting out Death Dresses Poorly, and got on with another publisher, with Fluky Fiction. And Fluky Fiction was able to have a narrower release window. So I had these books all coming out from 2 different publishers, and the Catching Hell one was about a 1-year release window, whereas Fluky Fiction was about 6 months. So Catching Hell was the first major book that I wrote, but Death Dresses Poorly was the very first one that came out just by random kismet of release windows.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm familiar with those as well. I think, a lot of people don't know kind of like more of the, I guess, traditional publishing, small press publishing, not indie publishing. You're really on their timeline, and it could be anything from 6 months to 3 years. I mean, you really don't know. It's really just kind of whatever works for their thing. So exactly, you could have something that you wrote that comes out well after something that you just wrote. So it's definitely up to them how that works.
It was just strange. I liked the way that it worked out, but it also meant that, as I said, I only started writing about 9 years ago professionally. I had Catching Hell before that. There's a story behind that as to how I already had that written. But the point was, I already had it when I got started. And then Death Dresses Poorly was the first one that I wrote after I really committed to becoming an author, like writing something for the purpose of releasing it to the world, which Catching Hell I wrote for my own enjoyment, and it turned into something, whereas Death Dresses Poorly was, no, this is something that can go out into the world, and I think it belongs out there. So yeah, you're right. It's just weird timing, but I love the way that it worked out. It gives me a unique story if someone asks.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm interested, you said you just kind of really started focusing on writing 9 years ago. I don't know how old you are. So, I mean, I don't know, when you started, but I'm guessing that you're not, 20s. So we'll say.
I'm not, I am not 20s.
Me either.
I'll tell you, I'm 45 years old. I got started when I was 36.
Okay.
And it was a very specific day. It was February 29th. It was the leap day, I remember very clearly, of 2016, that I decided that with the help and encouragement of my wife, who was like, you wrote a book. This is something. This isn't just like the random ramblings of somebody who just wants to write stuff down. Like there's a beginning, middle, and end. There's a plot here. There's characters that you can enjoy. So release this. And that kind of turned into a thing where I was like, you know what, I probably can. And I came at it later, and I really appreciate the fact that I did, because I used to write in high school, and I had those ramblings that she was describing. And then I stopped. I basically stopped cold turkey when I was 18, and I moved far away from home. And as time went on, I would kind of come back to it a little bit with a little bit of pen and paper writing. But it wasn't until I sat down with that big one that I really created something that could turn into something in the long run. And by that time, I was in my 30s. I had a job and I had 2 kids and a mortgage and my wife who still wants to spend time with me and a dog that I have to walk. Like, I had all these adult things happening because I was a grown man doing grown man things. And it allowed me to come at the writing world in particular with a lot more mature perspective. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with being a fresh-faced grad student who's coming out with a pocket full of ideas and eyes full of dreams, but that wasn't me. And I realized that that's probably never going to be me. How do I make that work for me? And that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah. It's interesting. You said, how you wrote and then you were 18. I kind of wish that same thing where like, I think when we're, a certain age, it just kind of comes more naturally in the sense of we have these dreams and beliefs and then life kind of hits us in the face.
That's it.
For me, I took a pretty big break as well because I had kids and I, just working and I just didn't write for a long time, didn't come back to later in life. And it's frustrating because I know a lot of people never come back to it. Like they have these things when they're younger and they're like, I really want to do this. And then life hits them in the face and then they stop. What would you say to people? Like, what was the thing? I know you said your wife, but obviously you had written something. So what was the thing that brought you back to it?
I think the main reason was that when I was younger and I had, as I said, a penchant for writing and I was known for that as well, right? Like I ran in some more artistic circles in high school. So it wasn't an unknown commodity that Marc knows how to write. It was out there. But when I moved out, I wanted to do a billion different other things. And I moved, like I said, I moved about 3,000 miles away from where I was born. I left my family back there. I came with a friend and his family to where I live right now. And I wanted to experience everything that I possibly could, like anybody can. And I would encourage anybody who has that inkling to do it, because if it is something that you really love and it's something that you are really passionate about, you're probably going to find a way to come back to it, or you're going to find a way to incorporate it into your life somewhere along the line. And that's exactly what I did. I started with just watching some things and writing some things down. And the primary impetus, bringing it all back to one of my favorite foods, was that I had this small dream to be a professional poutine reviewer and like have a website and go to different places. My goal, my dream at that time, as humble as it was to just have somebody pay me to eat their poutine and give it a review. But it was that writing that got me going. And the kind of point of that story is you don't know where that inspiration is going to come from. So if you leave those things behind when you're younger, it's okay. If they are meant to find you in the future, they will find you, and they'll find you in the strangest and most unique of ways. And then, like I said, you can incorporate those kinds of things into your life. And that's exactly what I've done with mine.
Yeah. I love that you said that, because I kind of went through the same thing. Like people would say, they knew I had been a writer. I had been a writer in high school, and then even, did some journalism in my 20s. And then people say, "How are you going to write? You don't write anymore." And I'd always be like, "Oh, I'm so busy. I don't have time." And, and I would always brush it off. And for a long time that worked for me. I just really was busy and it wasn't something I could do. And then I remember one day I put on a show, and I've mentioned this before, which was Umbrella Academy. And I put on the first episode of Umbrella Academy. And there was just something about that show that it just triggered that thing in my brain. And I watched it and I really liked it. And then maybe that night, or a few nights later, I was laying in bed and I thought, how did I write? Like, where did that come from? And it just opened, boom, like a floodgate. And I've written ever since. And I think that's the thing, is we tend to think if we don't do it in our 20s, then we're never going to do it again. And that is a lot of like culture telling us that too. Like, oh, you gotta do that. But a lot of writers are going to come back to it later in life.
Yeah, it's something that I see a lot. Like, I've been to a bunch of conventions and I've been to different like comic expos and that kind of thing. And I speak to a lot of young writers, and I'm always very interested in what they're passionate about and how think they're going to come about their particular writing journey, but there is very much a sense of urgency within that particular crowd, whether they are someone who's like born from the ground up to be a writer, or somebody who came to it a little bit later, maybe in their teens or in high school or something like that. They're more often than not, let's say 75% of the time, there's this urgency to, I want to get this out, and I want to write this, and I'm working on this right now, and I've got this spec script that I'm working on. I want to I'm just like, well, it's fantastic. You're probably a lot more motivated to do those kinds of things than I was at that exact same age. And there's nothing that says that they can't do it. My message is always, you can take those breaks and you can experience other things, because the world will not pass you by just because you're 23 years old and ready to take on the world. You can let a lot of these things simmer for a little bit as well, because I think, for at least me personally, and for other people that I've spoken to as well, allowing yourself to have that little bit more kind of mature mentality can definitely help set your expectations when the time comes and you get to that point. And I have all the faith in the world that you will get to that point. It's just, I don't want someone to reach that point at a very young age and then face those layers and layers and layers of rejection papers or emails, I guess. Nobody sends papers.
I know, like, it's not papers anymore. Like,
it's not paper
I used to have a folder of papers.
Yeah, exactly. I would get the rejection emails and I would print them. I wouldn't really do anything with them. So I still had papers.
You would
Maybe
slap
that's where
yourself in the face.
I didn't. Again, it's that realistic expectation. When, like, I have no bona fides when I walked into this business, right? I was 36 years old. I had a crudely edited, despite the fact that it was 4 years of editing, that was mostly just kind of like story beats and pacing and getting rid of large chunks that I didn't need. I cut an entire protagonist. Originally it was 3 protagonists in that story, and I cut it down and it ended up just being 2. And it was still very rough around the edges, and I had some editors take a look at it and tell me that very thing. It's like, it needs work on this, that, and the other. So when I walk into a place where I'm submitting to, and they would reject me, I'm like, yeah, that probably makes a lot of sense. I think that there's probably some other things I need to work on here. And luckily, I was able to find a publisher that was able to see the vision that I was going for and help me out and get to that point. And just like I was with Death Dresses Poorly, because Death Dresses Poorly, like I said, I edited it one time. It's much, much shorter. Like my epic science fantasy was 225,000 words, and Death Dresses Poorly is only about 46,000 words. And it's very dialogue heavy. It's very punchy. It moves very quickly. So I didn't need to edit a whole lot, because I didn't have to worry about continuity issues and whether or not this bit of magic works that I originally created 500 pages ago. And I didn't need to dance with those kinds of devils.
Yeah. Just to circle back, I want to let listeners know out there, life doesn't end at 30. You can, or 40 or 50. And one thing I found when I came back to it later in life was that those experiences that I did have, because I wasn't writing, so, I was finding different things to, kind of use that creativity or use that time. Those actually helped me become a better writer when I did come back to it, because it had seasoned in a way, seasoned my own brain by having life experiences, helped me, because I wrote when I was younger, and I had these, the stories were always, they were good, I think, in the sense of with the experiences that I had. But when I came back to it, I felt like I had added the ability to add layers that I didn't even really understand when I was younger. Do you find that in your work?
Absolutely, I do. Absolutely, I do. And in writing Death Dresses Poorly, because Catching Hell is not any kind of, it's not me putting myself into a story. Whereas Death Dresses Poorly, it very much was inspired by me writing kind of a version of myself when I was that age, when I was about 20 years old, and how I would react to the situations that were going on in this character's life. And being able to remember what it was like being 20, even if I didn't necessarily go through the experiences that Ethan goes through in this book, and being at an age like when I wrote it in my mid-30s, to have a pretty solid feel of the kind of man that I'm probably going to be when I am in my 50s and 60s, and write that character in the character of Death. And I don't think I would have been able to write that character as confidently as I did if I had written it when I was 20 or 21 years old. I think that my opinion of what it means to be a 50, 60-year-old man is a lot more educated now than it was back then. And that's just one example of how I think that it affects my writing. But for this book in particular, it definitely allowed me to write a far more accurate, older version of myself.
And that's interesting because, yeah, I mean, I used to think 50 was so old. When I was somebody was like,
Right?
oh, when I'm 50, like life's over at 50.
That's
And
it.
then when
That's
in my
done. I'm just
50s,
gonna start digging now.
right. I was like, what's the point even of doing anything once you're in your 50s, you know? And like, so
Yeah.
I think that's kind of that thing, is you get to have the perspective of both. You've been 20, you've been 30, you've been 40, you know, and then you're 50. You get to have a different perspective, where when you are younger, you tend to have these kind of preconceived notions of what those different ages mean, you know, like, are you going to be just hobbling around, you know, you know, I still roller skate, you know, like I still do things that I did when I was younger. But if you told me that at 20, I would have been like, nah, I'd break a bone, you know?
Yeah, very much so. Like, if I had told my like 18-year-old self that at the age of 45 and getting older every day, that I still play baseball and am still a catcher for baseball, like full on baseball, not like slow pitch or anything like that, I'd be like, well, I'm going to die. I'm just going to die. Or my knees are just going to fall apart. It's like, no, you look after yourself, you eat right, you do the right exercises, the right stretches, and just generally have a more positive outlook, as opposed to I'm going to die and you're probably going to be okay. And I wouldn't have thought that back then, but I'm here and I'm doing it, and I've taken plenty of baseballs into the face to prove it.
Yeah, I've wiped out on my roller skates. I have like a nice gnarly scar on my knee from like a few months ago. So yeah, I mean, it happens, but I didn't break a bone. So there's that. Let's talk about the book that came out today. And you said it's is it a follow-up to Death Dresses Poorly?
It is.
Okay.
It is. So it takes place 2 years after Death Dresses Poorly. The character of Death has now been working in that role of Death for 2 years, and is given an unexpected invitation to the wedding of the one person in the world he actually cares about. And while he is trying to sort out what it's going to be like doing this while also being the specter of death, he happens to meet someone who he can potentially see a future with, and kind of starts to fall a little bit smitten. And it's navigating that fresh joy of a young relationship, while also attempting to deal with the fact that not only is he the specter of death, he is also attempting to fix a bunch of issues that are going on in the world that he has no small part in causing in the first place. And in this case, it takes the form of rips in reality that are threatening to tear things apart and just generally bring everything down around us. So he's weighing all these massive, monumental, universe-changing issues, while also still trying to find out, hey, is this someone that I can see a future with? So whereas Death Dresses Poorly is an urban fantasy dark comedy, Death at a Wedding is an urban fantasy dark romantic comedy, because it's absolutely a romantic comedy. There is still the meet cute, and there is still the fun banter back and forth, getting to know one another, but it is surrounded on all sides by this much larger, much more cosmic thing going on in his life.
That's really cool. Now, you mentioned comedy. Do all of your stories have an element of comedy in them?
Not particularly. It's specifically these ones. There is some small elements of comedy in my short story collection, Between Conversations, because Between Conversations is a series of short stories that are told chronologically. They take place in the same world as my Catching Hell series. So I wanted to write a bunch of short stories and do them in different genres, mostly to just try and spread my wings a little bit. I felt that I'd kind of pigeonholed myself into just writing very much the science fantasies and whatever it is that Death Dresses Poorly was. And I wanted to try and write horror and YA and things that are more, I believe I describe it as Tarantino-esque. There's one that's very like Tarantino, like punchy dialogue driven in a different way than what Death Dresses Poorly is. Those kinds of things. So there is a little bit of comedy in there, but it is mostly a lot more serious stuff. Like the science fantasy stuff that I write, it is very much inspired by a lot of the kind of like epic fantasy stories that people have read in the past, which not a lot of room for comedy in those kinds of things. So again, it was a brain wipe. Writing Death Dresses Poorly was a brain wipe. I wanted to do something completely different, and I thought that dark comedy was the way to go, because that was just kind of how I was feeling at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you mentioned that you are traditionally published for some of your books, and then you're indie published for another.
Yeah, so that is, well, all of my books are currently available from Fluky Fiction, which is a small independent publisher. They have a very limited selection of books that they have published, and the ones that they have are fantastic. And I'm not just saying that because a lot of them are mine. They are a small publisher out of Maine, primarily a husband and wife duo. They do sometimes have some interns that help them out. And they have a very unique voice that I kind of wanted to be a part of, and that's why I submitted to them in the first place. And then for when I did Between Conversations, which I did completely independently and did it myself, I very much wanted to learn the ropes on how to do that. And I felt that I had to, and that was the perfect book for it, because I mean, as you and the viewers and listeners just heard me describe, it is kind of a unique duck, right? Like it's a very difficult, even if it takes place in the same world. I couldn't go back to my publisher at the time and say, I'd like to release this one, and here's the premise of it, and then explain it as I just did to you. Yeah. And they would look at me cockeyed. Yeah. So I'm like, well, this is an excellent kind of jumping off point for me to try and release something myself and do something completely independently. And at the end of the day, it is, of my at least 4 books, still a little early on the 5th one to determine where it's going to go, it's my only Amazon #1 bestseller in one particular category. So
well, that's interesting, because I was going to ask a question on that, which was, could you speak to the differences in having something that's published through somebody else, publishing through yourself, anything from marketing to sales? What are those differences that you saw, other than obviously you just said that, which is really intriguing?
Yeah, it wasn't as jarring a transition from going from a traditional publication to a self-publication for me. I know that a lot of young writers and writers starting out will start with going completely independent and completely self-published, and any trip around Amazon into some of the dark recesses of it can tell you exactly what that's going to yield. Sometimes it's diamonds in the rough, and a lot of times it's stuff that needs more polish. And I suppose that I might not be the best person to ask this, only because when I released Between Conversations and I knew that I had to get it edited, although they weren't releasing it, I went to Fluky Fiction, who also sides as editors for hire, and asked if they would be willing to do that. And seeing as how we'd worked together before and we had an excellent working relationship, they were willing to edit it as well. So when I released traditionally, I would have the publishing house go through the edit and the copy edit and whatnot. And when I did it with Fluky Fiction for Death Dresses Poorly, they handled everything expertly. And when I did it with another publisher originally that eventually went under, and then my Catching Hell books got moved over to Fluky Fiction, they were willing to take it on because they're awesome and they really helped me out. The original publisher did all of that work and pushing and promotion and got it everywhere out for me, not as much editing. And anybody who picked up the first version of the first part of Catching Hell, so Catching Hell Part 1 Journey, they'll absolutely pick it up. And I took a look at it after it was printed and finished and put out into the world. I'm like, that's still not quite where I want it to be. I think that there's still some things here that needs to get tightened up. So when I did things independently, I wanted to make sure that I worked with an editor that I knew and that I trusted. So I just went back to the source. I think everything in my writing world up to this point, particularly today, comes back to the fact that I built an excellent relationship with this particular publisher who offered those services in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. So do you think, you said that the one that you did independently is the one that got the banner, on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
Do you
Yes.
think that has to do with content, or do you think it's just kind of what it was?
I think that for that one, it found the right niche at the right time. I've seen a lot of different short story collections, and some of them, a lot of them look fantastic, and they are very good short story collections, but a lot of them also look like they have been put together very quickly, and maybe don't have quite the polish that I believe that I put into this one. Again, that time that I took to grow up and become a man also kind of taught me, because I would love to pick up short story collections or find stuff on Amazon and just buy it. And sometimes, like I said, there was great reads in there, and I like a good short story collection or a good anthology of some kind, because that's the kind of stuff that I usually am able to digest pretty quickly, right? Just pick up, read a story or two, depending on how long they are. All right, I can digest those for the night and put it aside. And the time that I took to kind of tighten up between conversations, and the fact that there is this kind of narrative thread running all through it, like it takes place over thousands of years, but characters and beats and things happening in the background all kind of ties together. And I've had it mentioned a couple of times from some readers, like that they really appreciated the fact that if you were paying attention in story number 1 or story number 2, something happening in the world is mentioned in story number 5 or 6, and then you have that to kind of draw from. So I wanted to make sure I connected those narrative threads, and it just really worked. I was able to promote it a little bit stronger than I had in the past. I'm much better at promotion right now. And when I said that I hadn't released a book for 5 years until today, that last book that I released, so my most recent release until today, was Between Conversations. So that was the point where I was the most mature and most understanding of things like the media and the interviews that I would have the most success with, and the people that I really wanted to talk to and really help push things, when to promote things, when to drop the price on something and have a flash sale for a weekend, and that kind of thing. That was my crucible for those kinds of things. And I was just making sure that it was listed in the right categories in Amazon, and making sure that I was marketing it to the right people, boosting it at the right time. That's where it came from.
Yeah, for sure. And so you wrote that one, and then you weren't intending to do a follow-up to Death Dresses Poorly. What was it that made you do it? Was it just gnawing at your brain? Did you feel like you didn't quite complete the first story, or what brought you back to that story?
I think the easiest answer, if I just wanted to summarize it, was so much fun. It's characters that I really enjoyed. And I was never sad that I was never going to tell a story in that world again. But as time went on, and I was doing all those marketing, and I was talking about other books as I am right now, I realized that I wasn't having that same kind of fun. I wasn't having that loosey-goosey kind of fun, because they're loosey-goosey books. It's an absurd premise. It needs an author who's not taking himself and not taking the book too seriously. And I really kind of appreciated that. And the more long-winded answer, if there is such a thing, I'll try and summarize. Death Dresses Poorly, the original, the seed that grew the tree that is this book, was that the very first scene, which is the scene that takes place between Ethan and the enigmatic man in black in Chicago O'Hare Airport, is an actual thing that happened to me. It is not identical. Obviously, I wasn't coming back from my mother's funeral or anything like that. My mother is still very much alive, and she's my hero, and I love her to death. But the main conversation, the enigmatic man in black, the things that we talked about, the random encounters that we have, and the way that the conversation ended was all drawn from memory, from something that happened to me. So years later, another thing happens to me, that sticks with me, that has a lot of interesting elements to it. And that became the first chapter of Death at a Wedding. I changed a lot more things, and anybody who reads the book will kind of understand why. Like there's aspects to it that don't necessarily need to mirror everything that happened to me absolutely perfectly. But that was the main drive. And when that happened, and it stuck with me, and I realized that it was sticking with me a lot like that meeting in Chicago was sticking with me in the first place. Now, I sat on that meeting because I literally was like 19 or 20 years old when I had that meeting. And as I said, I didn't start writing it until I was in my 30s. This one, I realized it was the impetus for another story. It was the place to get started on another story, and that I wanted to write it. I wanted to have that fun again. And even though I was on record in a number of places as saying I'm not going to do another one, I very much it was there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and I'm satisfied with where it's at. I want to do it again. And so I said that I wrote Death Dresses Poorly in 6 weeks, and it's 46,000 words. Death at a Wedding is 60,000 words, and I wrote it in 4 weeks, fingers flying, everything else set aside. I was at a place in my life at that time where I had that opportunity. And it wasn't even in the COVID times where everybody had a bit of time on their hands. I wrote very little during COVID, and what I did write was terrible. I wrote it after that, and I had the beginning, middle, and end in my head all of a sudden. I'm very much a pantser. If it's not evident by now, I am 100% pantser through and through. So that's exactly what I did. As I wrote it from the seat of my pants, a story that I wanted to tell, making it to the points that I wanted to hit, the ending that I wanted to have. And here we are. I didn't expect it. I apologize to everyone who I lied to at different sales points, saying this is going to be it. It's going to be the only one. I swear it was not intentional. Please just chalk it up to artists just being artists, and forgive me, and maybe give this one a try.
That's funny. So do you think you'll end up with another one?
That's the magic question, isn't it? So first of all, I'm never going to close the door on it again. Do I have an idea right now for a new one? No, I do not. However, I lied before. So what am I going to do? I'm going to cover my bases this time. And I think that, especially with the way that the story kind of comes together and the way some of the meetings happen near the end, there is clearly a jumping off point where I can go to another one. But somebody who picks this one up right now and plows through it in a couple of days and is like, oh my God, I want more. You're probably going to be waiting a little while, because it took me about 7 or 8 years between the first one and writing this one. And I'm not going to say it's going to be 7 or 8 years, but it might not be. It might be. I don't know. Right. I don't know. There's a place for it to go to, and I'm not going to close the door to it. So that's what I'll say to that.
Yeah, and I'm a pantser too, so I totally get that. Because again, like I said, my book Do Over was initially a standalone, and then I ended up like a year later writing a follow-up to it that I never intended to write. And then I was done. Like those two were done. I told the whole story, and then one day, I'm not kidding, like last year, so this is again about 5 years later, I'm driving down the road, and boom, one of the characters is like, oh yeah, by the way, you haven't told my story, so we're going to do that now. And I did. So yeah. That's
how it happens. It's exactly how it happens. And there's a lot of like plotters out there, and a lot of people that I work with in the writing industry, and people that I know who are just listening to us say this and being like, no, what do you, no, you can't do it that way. And that's their process, and I completely respect that. But you're just hitting there, and then the bolt of lightning hits, and you're just like, well, now this is going to be an entire thing, and then off you go, and you just start typing.
So some people say, well, are you planning? I'm like, don't even ask it. And I was joking. I said this the other day when I was that other interview with the podcast. I was like, I plan nothing. And it is true. I plan nothing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have no answers.
For my epic science fantasy, they take place in what is called the Ryujin world. And I've been living mentally writing stories in that world since I was about 15 or 16 years old. And I did write books. Well, no, I wrote stories in that with pen and paper. I still have them. They're horrible, and I was allergic to paragraphs and proper grammar. But I do still have those. So I've been always kind of living in that world, and I know that there's more stories to tell in that world. So in that one, I say, yes, there will be follow-ups to Catching Hell, and I have manuscripts that I'm working on at any one point in time as I choose to go back to them, because I'm a pantser, and I'm just like, well, I could do that, or I could just kind of bugger off for 3 months. That's exactly what I'm going to do. But that one very clearly is a world that is being built and there's other stories to tell in it. Whereas these ones, I try and keep them a little bit more contained. Like at the first Lord of the Rings, you knew there was going to be more Lord of the Rings stories, but like if you're looking at like Alex Cross novels, every one of them could be kind of standalone, right? There's mild narrative threads that travel through them, but I see these a lot more like that kind of thing as opposed to the big drawn out Shannara, Terry Brooks style, this is going to go on forever Wheel of Time stuff that I also kind of dabble in. So yep, we don't know. It's a journey for us as well. The joy of being a pantser is just like, I really don't know where this is going to go. Let's find out.
Yeah, you're like, I have to do this. It's just like, let's see what happens. I don't know. Let's see what happens today. Well, and it's funny because, like, do you ever write anything that you don't think you'll ever publish? Like, I have a coworker who he likes to world build, so he just writes world building because he just likes it, but he does it for himself, like he's working through something. Do you ever write like that, where you're kind of just writing things you want to write it for yourself, but you're not like, I got to get this out into the world?
Yeah, I do. And that a lot of that comes from the early writing that I was doing before I started doing this professionally in 2016. I had mentioned that in that journey from being 18 to being in my 30s, there was some stuff that I would write, and Catching Hell just kind of became the end result of that, where I actually created a story. And as I mentioned at the start of writing that, I was just doing it for myself. I thought of characters that I wanted to write down, and I never ever intended it to go out into the world. And then when I was done, I was like, oh, this kind of could. But I had other stuff, right? Like I had some other things either written with pen and paper or other things that I had typed out, or even just like a quick synopsis that I'd thrown together. And like, is there anything kind of here? And some of that stuff is turned into things, or it turned into short stories that were included in my between conversations. But I absolutely have some stuff in there that's like, this was fun to write at the time, but it's a little derivative and I don't really think I can do anything with it. Or there was one that I wrote and I had a lot of fun writing it, but I'm like, this is like almost the exact plot of a comic book series that I was really into at the time when I was like in my late teens and early 20s. And I'm like, I don't think I could release this without somebody suing me, because I didn't intend that to happen. But by the time I was, I don't know, like 10,000 words into it, it's like, oh, I kind of see what I did there. I probably shouldn't write that. I'll just file that one away. And there's a couple of things that I have that are just kind of like that. Just like I use those ideas to kind of springboard into new stories, but they will likely not see the light of day.
Yeah. And how many things do you write at the same time? Like, are you a one project person, or do you kind of have multiple things you dabble in until one just sticks?
I have multiple things that I dabble in. I have manuscripts that I've been sitting on for a decade. And I know that there's absolutely a story there. There's one in particular that is definitely 10 years old. The concept is one that I'm very comfortable with right now, but I really, even now, after writing as much as I have, I don't know if I can write the climax of the story to the level that I would be satisfied with. And I just set it aside. And every once in a while I come back. And during COVID, when I wrote like 5,000 words, it was for that story. And then I just threw them all out because, as I said, they were terrible. And I feel like at some point I will be able to get it out, but that's 10 years. And I've done a lot in that 10 years and written a lot of other stories. And it's not the only one that's sitting in my works in progress file that I literally have one that just says whip on my computer and on a flash drive as a backup. Always have backups. People always have backups. I've learned that. And in that there is manuscripts in all kinds of states. But as I showed myself with Death at a Wedding, I wasn't really working on anything at that time because I am a pantser, and I'm also someone, to go back to kind of the anti-author point, I don't in any way believe in writing goals, writing challenges, or anything that says you have to write 1,000 words a day. Or I am respectfully one of the biggest anti-NaNoWriMo people you're ever going to find in your life.
I've never
And I respect the people. I respect the people that can do it. I think 50,000 words in a month is fantastic. I've done it myself. I have accidentally participated in it twice when I just got really hot while writing in November. Like it just like, well, Between Conversations was almost entirely written in November, and so was Death at a Wedding. And I'm just like, well, I didn't intend to do that, but I'm still kind of angry at this entire promotion. And it ebbs and flows with me. And because it ebbs and flows, there's always something that could probably be finished off in my works in progress file.
Yeah. Well, my life motto is always like, don't tell me what to do. So the moment someone's like, you should, I'm like, then I won't.
Go ahead.
Okay. Don't tell me what to do.
You need to write 10,000 words, and you need to get this, that, and the other. You need to read all the times that you're not writing. I'm just like, no, I'm not going to. I'm going to watch a baseball game.
That's right. I was going to write because you told me I needed to write. Now I'm going to go watch TV.
No, I'm not going to. No, I'm not going. No, I've been meaning to catch up on this TV show I've been missing, and that's just to spite you, random person. No.
That's totally me. I get to that. So do you, like, when you write, is it like you're just going to sit down and knock out 500 words, maybe 5,000? You don't know when you sit down that you're going to knock out something, or do you have like?
I usually know. Yeah. I can feel it. Like when that writing bug hits, I absolutely can feel it. So I've described my writing process before. I do have a full-time job. I love my full-time job. I love the people that I work with. I find my job fulfilling. But at my job, I have a 1 hour lunch. And when I want to write, I take my time. And it takes me 10, 15, 20 minutes to eat my lunch or whatever it is. And so then I still have the rest of my lunch hour. And then that is when I write. So it's not necessarily a word goal. It's this 40 minutes, 45 minutes that I have a day sitting at my cubicle, which it doesn't take away from my proper work. I always make sure I'm communicating clearly what's going on with my boss, and my boss is fantastic about allowing that to happen, because I don't let the writing life bleed in. It's like me going for a walk around the building that I work in or something like that. It's just a way to kind of mentally reset. And so it's not about word goals for me per day. I usually kind of know how long I want a chapter to be, but other than that, it's how much can I fill into writing in 40 to 45 minutes. 3, maybe 4 times a week out of the 4 or 5 days a week that I'm working.
Wow. Do you ever write at home, or pretty much just during that time?
For a long time, I said, no, I cannot write at home. Writing at home was practically impossible for me because, as I said, I had 2 young boys, and I very much wanted to be a part of their lives. And I already work early. Like my job it's one that I get up early to do. So I'm not one of those people who would be able to wake up at 5 o'clock and get going and write for an hour or 2 or 3 and then go off to work, because I'm already getting up at a really early time going off to my job. Luckily, that means I can get off earlier as well. But then I start cooking because I'm the one who makes the dinners in this house. My wife is a fantastic baker, and I am a moderate to okay chef. So I have to make that food, and then I have to help the kids with the homework, and I have to, and it just goes on. And then 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock rolls around. And when the kids were younger, then they would go to bed, and now they're both in their teens, and I don't care. But when they were younger, I'm like, I'm done. And like, it gets 9:30, 10 o'clock, and I'm finished. I cannot write at home. And there was all these distractions. But that said, long-winded way of saying, now I do start to do things. So the space that I am in right now, COVID made me realize my 2 sons both had desks and computers that they both built their own computers, which is fantastic that they have in their room. My wife has worked from home basically since my oldest son was born. So she's got her office space. I had no space. I had no square footage that was mine in the house. Everything was a shared real estate. Yeah. So there was a spare room in the basement. I committed to turning it into something because I knew that I couldn't keep it up on what I was doing forever, and I needed a space for myself, and I needed the opportunity to do stuff like this, especially during the start of COVID, because I had released between conversations just before COVID hit. So I was doing press and I was doing interviews like this one at that time. And I had to hijack my son's bedroom because he was getting into like video editing and making YouTube videos and that kind of thing. So he had the setup that I've got now. He had the decent camera and the microphone and the pop filter and the green screens and all this. I was just like, oh, dude, that's great. I'm using it because I'm your dad and I'm pulling rank. And it still took me years after that point, well after the kind of COVID times, but now I'm established. I have a standing desk down here. I'm sitting at the moment, but I do have a standing desk down here and multiple screens and all kinds of stuff. And I'm recording a new audio book down here. And so I do have my own space, but this is only in the last year that I've had this. Before this, strictly work lunchtime in my cubicle, walls up, headphones on.
Yeah, that's impressive. I mean, because it's like that. Sometimes you're at work all day and you're like, I'm going to write on my lunch break. I do this. I bring my computer. I'm like, I'm going to write on my lunch break. I think on my lunch break, and the last thing I want to do is anything. Like, I just need to decompress. So like, I don't write. And we're the same thing. We have a house full, and this is actually what I'm in right now is actually the front hall closet. I just converted it into like this little studio space because I was like, I need a space that it can be like away from all the chaos,
Yes, absolutely.
And it's understood if I'm in this space, then I'm obviously doing something.
100%. When I recorded the audiobook myself for Death Dresses Poorly. So I wasn't writing at the time during COVID, but I was learning other skills. So that's when I really kind of got into cooking, as did a lot of people. I also learned how to pick locks for some reason. I thought that was a really fun kind of pastime to have. And I got into audio recording and audio mixing. And so when I recorded the audiobook for Death Dresses Poorly, which I wanted to do myself, this very personal characters, and I felt that I was the one to do it, and I had a little bit of knowledge when it came to the kind of technical aspects of it. I did it in my master bedroom closet. I made a couple videos about it as well. And the master bedroom closet, it's not huge, but it was just big enough that the sound was dead. I could stand up because I absolutely have to stand up when I'm recording these kinds of things. It takes the pressure off my diaphragm. And it came out fantastic. I'm really, really proud of the way that it came out. So now that I'm recording down here, this room that I'm in right now, even though I have like a little recording space just off to the side that you can't see, has to live up to the expectations that were set by my master bedroom closet.
Yeah. Closets are amazing. They're so much easier to work with if you're trying to work with sound. So yeah. So what are you looking forward to for the future? Like, are you working on anything else now that this is out, or are you taking a breather?
Well, I'm really kind of in the midst of having conversations about Death at a Wedding right now, and I'm very much enjoying it because I feel like I did when I first released Death Dresses Poorly, because I'm dealing with a subject and characters and books that I really love and have a personal connection to. I do have another finished manuscript. I have a strictly science fiction manuscript. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do with it. Every once in a while, I feel like I'm going to really kind of push to make that one that next level for me. Do I want to try and find an agent for that, or do I want to try and work up to a larger publishing house than the ones that I've worked with in the past? I would love to work with Fluky Fiction again, but I think they and I both know that this particular story just isn't quite their cup of tea. I am confident in the fact that they would be able to do amazing things with it, but I also know that it's outside of kind of their wheelhouse based on conversations that we've had together. So yeah, I'm going to try and push to get that out there. I hopefully won't make it another 5 years until my next release. But on the flip side of that, in the first 18 months that I was in the writing world, I released 3 books. So I got to find a happy medium, and hopefully I can do that with the new one. And then, as I said, I'm always happy to come back to writing in my Ryujin world, writing the follow-ups to Catching Hell, and telling more stories in that world.
That's really cool. Yeah. I mean, it sounds really intriguing. So why don't you tell everybody again a little bit about Death at a Wedding? So did I say it right?
Mm-hmm.
Where they can find it. And if you have any events or anything coming up that you'd like people to know about, go ahead and let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. So Death at a Wedding is released today, April 8th, 2025. Yeah. And it is the unexpected follow-ups to my debut novel, Death Dresses Poorly, which originally came out in 2017. So it is the further, I hesitate to use the word adventure, but it's the further stories of death, and this particular time around, death finds a possible love interest, and as anyone can kind of piece together, being death while also having a love interest, and it being an incredibly snarky and sarcastic and humorous death, as opposed to whatever Brad Pitt was doing in Meet Joe Black, is probably going to cause all kinds of interesting stories, and that's exactly where it's at today. So as for anything for finding me, I have a website at www.marcwatson.ca. That's MarcWatson. And I also am on Facebook at facebook.com/MarcWroteABook, all one word. And I am on, I think, every other social media platform, for better or worse. And on those, you can find me at @WriteWatson, WriteWatson. As for events that are coming up, I have submitted to be in the Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo, our great big comic expo that we have up here that I've been to before. I haven't been there for the last few years because I didn't have really anything new to offer, but now I do, and I'm just waiting to hear back on that. And that goes the last weekend of August. Oh, sorry, not August, April. In August, I will be at When Words Collide, which is always a fantastic event that takes place here in Calgary. It's Western Canada's largest writing convention. And I expect it to be on a number of panels there. And usually I'm just kind of milling around and looking to talk shop with anybody who wants to have those conversations with me. So that is where I will be.
Very cool. Well, it's been awesome talking to you, and I'll definitely check out your books. Especially those, they sound kind of like what I need right now. Something a little like dark is good, but funny is good too. Yeah. So, and we appreciate it. And definitely hope to see you again. And for everybody that tuned in, we really appreciate you listening tonight. This will be available on YouTube after today as well. So you can tune in if you didn't get to watch all of it. And just a reminder, it's always time to go indie now.